Good morning and welcome to the Chamber Forum. I'm Roy Williams. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. We're very thrilled that you joined us for this fourth installment of the new Chamber Forum format. These timely and relevant community discussions are really focused on news and issues that impact us, if not on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And today's session is a topic that the Chamber's made a very significant commitment of time and resources to in the last several years, and that's criminal justice reform. Before we get into that, though, I want to first recognize today's signature sponsor, Cox Business. So please welcome Ahi Park, Sales Manager for Cox Business, to the stage to say a few words. Ahi?
Thank you, Roy. Good afternoon. Cox is honored to be the signature sponsor for today's forum. I want to take a minute to think about all those impacted by the wildfires throughout the state. Our thoughts and prayers go out to our first responders and to those who have lost their homes, livestock, business, and lives. Please keep in mind that April is National Volunteer Month. It's not too late to get your business or organizations involved in bettering our community and making a difference in others' lives. I know with the fire devastation, there are many organizations that need our assistance this week. But first, let's enjoy our lunch, get some insight from our expert panelists, and cheer on the thunder tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahi. I'm also pleased to recognize our corporate sponsors. Those are ADG Inc. and Guernsey, so help me thank them as well. As I said, the Chamber formed a task force in December of 2015, about 2.5 years ago, to really look at Oklahoma County's criminal justice system. And this task force included really all of the players who are in the system and touch the system, along with community business leaders. We were obviously facing an overcrowded jail, but we knew that the challenges were not just the size or the quality of the building itself, of the facility. We knew that there were processes that underlined it and were also a part of the challenge. So we wanted to first understand who was in our jail and decide who we wanted to be there, and then develop a right sizing for the facility population. And only after this process could we really understand and determine what true facility and infrastructure needs existed. So following a year of work, the task force that we initially put together made a number of recommendations for improvements, many of which are in process today. But probably the most significant and the most important was the creation of a permanent council to continue this work and to institutionalize whatever we ended up putting in place. And that council was actually formed in the fall of last year. We made tremendous strides in the work, with the jail population dropping in excess of 1,000, which is about a 40% reduction. Our numbers still fluctuate, though. They go up and down a little bit. And part of it is not really our fault. It's the Department of Corrections who keeps some in our facilities as they face overcrowding themselves. So you can find more information on the progress around multiple areas in the Advisory Council's quarterly report, which we've provided at your chairs. Following lunch, we're going to have a panel discussion with 3 members of the original task force who now also serve on the new Oklahoma County Criminal Justice Advisory Council. We'll talk about the work that is happening now and what you can look forward to in the future. So for right now, enjoy your lunch, and we'll regroup shortly to introduce the panel. Thank you. I don't even have to ask for your attention. I already got it. Thank you. We're going to continue our program now, so please continue to enjoy your lunch if you're not yet finished. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to recognize some other members of the task force of the council I mentioned earlier who are here in attendance today, and their commitment to this effort has just been extraordinary. Ray Vaughn is one right here, County Commissioners. He's on the task force. I saw Chris Steele walk in. Chris is on it. And I believe, anybody else on the task force that I didn't see? Okay. Wonderful. I also want to introduce Timothy Tardibono. Timothy, if you'd stand. He's the new executive director. And he's been with us about 2 months now, I guess, and executive director of the Oklahoma County Criminal Justice Advisory Council. Now to the panel. And as I call your name, if you would come up and have a seat. First is Bill Citty, William Citty. Chief Citty became Oklahoma City's 48th Chief of Police on October 24, 2003. He began his career with the Oklahoma City Police Department in 1977. And prior to becoming Chief of Police, he served as Deputy Chief over the Administration Bureau. Help me welcome Chief Citty.
Thank you.
Next is Judge Tim Henderson. Judge Henderson became an assistant district attorney in the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office in 1987. He entered private practice in 1994, and he remained with the firm until taking the bench as district judge in July 2012. Help me welcome Judge Henderson. And finally, Commissioner Terri White. Terri White is the commissioner for the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and serves as the CEO for one of Oklahoma's largest state agencies. Terri was the first woman to be appointed Oklahoma Secretary of Health, serving in that capacity for then Governor Brad Henry from 2009 to 2011. Help me welcome Terri. Y'all let me go all the way to the end. So, thank all of you for being here today. We're going to invite questions from the audience after a while, and if you have a question, please raise your hand. So, first of all, to all of you, and Terri, you can start. You know, I know all of us have learned a whole lot in this entire process that we've been going through. Has there been anything you've learned or you were surprised about? And really, what have you identified as the most beneficial from being a part of this initiative and task force?
So thank you for the question. And before I start, I think we all would like to thank the Oklahoma City Chamber, who has done such an amazing job at propelling this to one of the biggest issues our city is challenging, our county is challenging, and our fellow sister cities right around Oklahoma City. This has been long in coming. One of the things that I often hear Roy say, that is what Clay Bennett said when he started this project, which was, it was now time to take care of our own and make Oklahoma City the place we want it to be for every person in our city. And I thought that was really exciting. In terms of surprise, there hasn't been a lot of surprise for me. There has been, I'll tell you one that was a slight disappointment, and the part I'm really excited about. We have some amazing services here in the state of Oklahoma for mental health and substance abuse treatment to divert people from the criminal justice system. And as we started our work together, it was still, and partly on us, still frustrating how many people didn't even know about the amazing opportunities. Partly because the door is so narrow, we don't publicize it a lot. We can only let in 1 out of every 3 people into the door, so it's hard to brag about it and talk about all these great things, and we're like, sorry, but you can't get that help because we don't have enough resources. So one of the exciting things, I think, and you'll hear this in my presentation, so I'll stop talking now, one of the exciting things, I think, is the recognition of what a critical function mental health and substance abuse treatment and diversion are going to play in solving this problem.
Well, I will say that one of the things that surprised me, and I've been in the criminal justice area, I guess, since about 1979, when I started out as a police officer when I was in college. But after taking the bench, this committee forming, the Vera Institute, giving us some statistics, probably what surprised me most was that our Oklahoma County Jail was about 28% occupied by people that were there on traffic charges. And that just blew me away that we had that many people, and 28% at that time was 28% of about 2,700 people that were sitting in the county jail that we were feeding every day and providing medical care to every day, that were there on traffic tickets that couldn't post a bond to get out on their traffic ticket. So that, Roy, that was probably the biggest eye-opener for me. I just didn't realize that that many people were housed in the Oklahoma County Jail because they couldn't pay a traffic ticket.
That was a surprise to me, too. And I had a lot of surprises during this process, and again, I'll echo what Terri said, that the Chamber's involvement in this has been the catalyst for really getting a lot of this off the ground, getting some things already changed off the ground, bringing Vera in and looking at the data and seeing what we're doing. So a lot of what was revealed, I mean, we look at data all the time, but we don't look at it as deeply as Vera came in and looked at it. For one thing, it's very hard. Our systems are not the best in the world across the board from bottom to top of the judicial system. That's one thing that needs to be changed. But if you don't have that and you don't know, you think you know. Anecdotally, you think you know what some of the issues are. But some of the things that were revealed and some of the statistics that were revealed on the individuals that, like the judge said, were pretty shocking. Now, some of those statistics you have to dig deeper to get the true interpretation of some of that, because some of those traffic charges are also there in lieu of also felony charges, and some of those felony charges are never going to go away. But that was probably the biggest thing that I saw in the beginning.
Good, thank you. Another question for all of you. We all know that locally we can control a lot of things, but we also know that there are state laws that we all have to comply with. And each of you see the criminal justice center or the criminal justice system from a different perspective. So when you look at it from your perspective, what statutory or procedural changes at the state level do you think are necessary or beneficial to helping with additional reforms at the county level?
So I'll start because everyone is a gentleman up here, and apparently they're going to let me go first, so I'd be happy to do that. So we'll be here for another 5 hours as I explain to you what the legislature needs to do to reform the criminal justice system in the state of Oklahoma. No, I'm just kidding.
So you're going to cut down on the time.
Right. No, I am kidding. One of the so here's a positive and some exciting things. There have been several criminal justice reform bills. Many of you have probably seen the coverage over the last 12, 16 months about how they didn't move last year, to many of our frustration, and they are moving this year. So that is very exciting. There is still more that needs to be done. One of the things that I think would be really critical, instead of trying to give you every specific that could change, is to say, I'm really glad you're here having lunch with us today, and I hope you will further engage in this process. There are opportunities and organizations that will share with you different pieces of legislation we're moving on, everything from protecting victims of trauma to ensuring that people have appropriate access to mental health and substance abuse care, to make sure that when we do have to look at criminal justice penalties, they're actually the right fit and the right type of penalty to improve our system, and that we're not taking low-level offenders and mixing them in with high-level criminal thinkers, because when you do that, you don't lower criminal thinking, you raise it. The science and the data is very clear about that. So there are some exciting things happening. There is much more that needs to be done, and I'd really encourage you to engage with the groups who are working on that.
You know, when I look at some of these laws that are out there, let's just say a crime of child abuse. Child abuse has 3 different penalty ranges. It can be from 0, if you're convicted of child abuse, it can be from 0 to life, or 0 to a year in the county jail, or up to a $500 fine. Those are all ors. So you could get a $1 fine for child abuse, or you could get life in prison for child abuse. Now granted, there are all kinds of different ways to abuse a child. From the case I had yesterday, an 18-month-old was held up and then stuck down into, it looked like a turkey fryer, and just the bottom part of his body was literally burnt off. So that might be a life imprisonment case, as opposed to not sending your kids to school or sending them out in the snow without a coat on. But in Oklahoma, we have these giant ranges of punishments. 0 to life, 3 years to life. And in Oklahoma is one of the few states that juries still assess punishments. Most states, juries find someone guilty or not guilty, and then the court, the judge, determines the punishment. In Oklahoma, I submit that to the jury. I give them a range. And sometimes juries really struggle on that because I say, you can find, he's been found guilty, you can give him 1 day in prison, or you can give him the rest of his life in prison, and anywhere in between. My understanding of a lot of countries is, for instance, in France, rape may carry 5 years, but you're going to spend every single day of 5 years in prison. We know what it is, and I understand all the sociology of it, the psychology of it. If we give good credits for getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, and give you good credits for not stabbing your cellmate, and give you good credits for going to class and those kinds of things, it might make people nicer in prison. But I would really like to see, as Commissioner White said, some specific laws that your punishment carries this much, and that's what it is. And then everybody going into it knows, jurors know, the public knows, the people that are committing the crimes know.
First off, individuals have to be held accountable for breaking the law. I don't care if it's a minor law, traffic offense, or if it's a felony. We need people to be held accountable. If we don't, then they're not going to take it seriously. I mean, we know from experience that's not going to happen. The issue is that they don't get rehabilitated behind bars. That there needs to be ways and means of holding people accountable besides putting them behind bars, because they don't get better behind bars. Their rehabilitation does not occur in the county jail, in prison. It doesn't happen. There are people that need to go to prison. I'll agree with the judge. There are people that need to be in prison for a period of time, if not sometime their lifetime. It's not going to change, and they're a danger to society. The majority of those people in prison don't fall within that category and haven't in the past. It just hasn't been a fair process. The issue is, how do we do that? Because so often now, and we do it unintentionally, I'm not saying lawmakers or anybody else does it intentionally, but we pass laws. We pass laws that pass on financial responsibility to the person getting out, or they can't get a driver's license, or they can't do this. We do everything possibly that we can to keep them from being successful. And those types of things need to change. It's a more fair way of dealing with individuals that break the law. It doesn't mean they get off the hook. It means they are held accountable, and we put things in place to help them better themselves, help them find jobs, help them get off drugs, help them deal with their mental health issues, because all of these are contributors to what we're seeing. Officers out there, in many ways, are unfairly being scrutinized for dealing with society's inability to deal with a lot of these issues, or unwillingness to deal with a lot of these issues. Somebody that has mental health problems and addictions. So those are the types of things that need to be reformed. And a fairness in the way we treat people, a fairness in the way we hold them accountable. It's not just locking them up and throwing away the key anymore, because that's not working.
Thanks, Bill. Now I'm going to ask them a couple specific questions per what they do and their involvement, and I'll start with Judge Henderson. And Judge, as the presiding judge for Oklahoma County, you've been able to enact process changes that address some of the recommendations that the Vera Institute had in their study. Can you talk about some of what those process changes were?
Well, one of the things that we recognize that causes a burden on our jail system here in Oklahoma County is the length of time that someone has to sit over in the jail before they get to court. Now, I have jurors ask me that all the time. Why does it take so long? Why was this person arrested in 2015 and we're just now going to trial? Why is that taking so long? Well, typically, my initial response is because the criminal defense attorney wants it to take that long. The reason being, the longer a case takes, the benefit it always is to a criminal defendant, because witnesses die, the interest goes away, memories fade, and those kinds of things. But it causes such a problem in the county jail. Now, especially if it's a low-level crime that someone's going to have to go to trial on, we've instituted and see many people in here, Chris Steele and our conditional bond people, where we're getting people out of the jail while they're waiting their charges that are not a threat to the public, that simply can't afford to post a bond. They're on conditions. They may have an ankle monitor. They may be under house arrest where they can only go to work or to the lawyer's office or to stay at a particular location. And with these ankle monitors, we can turn on a computer and see exactly where they are. So we're putting conditions on people other than coming up with cash to pay money to get out of jail while they're waiting their cases. I've instituted some procedures that require various municipal police departments. How many police departments do we have in Oklahoma County that
There's
report?
about 16, so.
About 16 or 17 different, you got Dell City, Midwest City, Nakoma Park, Edmond, Bethany, War Acres, Oklahoma City, all these police departments, and they all work a little bit differently to institute programs, requirements that if they arrest somebody, they got to get the charges filed, they got to get the person's in the jail, they have to move it on, they have to get things going. We review what's going on in the county jail, how long someone's been there. If charges hadn't been filed in 10 days, the district attorney's office has to come to a judge and ask for a continuance to get charges filed if they've been backlogged at some way or another. So the case processing is basically what I'm talking about, is moving the case along. We have lots of great diversion courts that help people that have mental health issues, that have alcoholic issues, that have drug issues, to get them out of the district court penalty phase and get them into these diversion courts where they can get treatment. Again, like Chief City said, they've got to be held accountable. People have got to be held accountable, or we will teach them it's okay to commit these crimes and nothing's going to happen to you, and you can have heroin on you any time of the day or night, and it's okay. We're going to arrest you, we're going to put you in, we're going to get you out, and it's just a cycle, and eventually the person dies or ends up committing some really bad crime against somebody. So that's the reform that I see the criminal justice system needs. If we want to, I've said this many times, I can get 1,000 people out of the Oklahoma County Jail today. If that's all we want to do is lower the population of jail, I can sit there all day long and my signature will get 1,000 people out of the jail. We can go to the Department of Corrections and we can just say, we're commuting everybody's sentence to time served, get out. But we got to be smart. Criminal justice reform has got to be more than just lowering people's sentences, making crimes that we used to think were really bad crimes and say they're not so bad anymore, and just letting people go. We need people like Commissioner White. We need these programs. These diversion courts are fantastic, and help people. Hold people accountable, but help them. I understand no one wants to be an alcoholic. No one wants to be a drug addict, but we got a whole bunch of them, right? We got a whole bunch of people, and we recognize it's not easy to not want that drink. I mean, what could be harder than being an alcoholic? To me, I see this every day. You go to lunch at Chili's. What's the first thing that happens to you when you sit down at that table? Somebody comes up and asks you, you want a drink? Would you like a cocktail? I mean, if you're an alcoholic, just think how tough that is. I go into 7-Eleven, there's a girl in a bikini holding a beer up, and I mean, right? When I sit down at Chili's for lunch, no one comes up to me and asks me, would you like some methamphetamine? So to me, it seems tougher to be an alcoholic, and we need to work on those things. And we know there's tough, and we know there's great programs, and the teen program, and that's what I see criminal justice reform about. Not just letting everybody out of prison, not just letting everybody out of the county jail. We've got to protect the public. My job is to protect the public, partly. His job is to protect the public. And thank God, most people follow the rules and follow the law. But people got to be held accountable, but they need help. And we've got to work on systems that makes that available to people, is help.
Who wants to follow Judge Henderson around? He seems to go to pretty interesting places.
Pretty soon they'll be offering you a joint.
Well, I guess they will.
So I think y'all are beginning to get a taste for the complexity of criminal justice and what all is involved in it. And Judge Henderson, I'm going to ask you one more question, and that is, another judge, Judge Cindy Trong, has really embraced reform efforts and has made a real personal commitment of not only time but political capital to get involved in this process. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about what her efforts have been?
Well, Judge Trong, she was elected to the bench, I believe, in 2010. She came from the district attorney's office, was an assistant district attorney, and she has embraced our system, our program, what we're trying to do, and she has for months now gone over, because we've started a program where we have our conditional bond people actually over in the county jail, so that when someone is brought in, arrested by the police, they can be reviewed, evaluated at that time to see if they're going to be eligible for a conditional bond. What was happening before is someone would get arrested, they would get put in the county jail, they'd be handcuffed to a rail, and they may sit there for 8 or 9 hours. Then someone gets them and takes them over and gets them fingerprinted and takes their picture, and then takes them and gets them changed out of the clothes, and then they sit somewhere else for 8 or 9 hours, and then they get set up into a pod somewhere. And so it was burdening the system. All the folks that worked over in the county jail just all night, all day were doing this, and then we'd find out this person may be eligible for a conditional bond, but now they've been in jail 2 or 3 days. It's cost us money, it's cost us time, it's cost us resources. So we've instituted a program, and Judge Strong has been instrumental in it, that she would actually go to the county jail on weekends after 5 o'clock, on Saturdays, on Sundays, and evaluate those conditional bond applicants and sign off on those that she believed were not a threat to the public that would qualify for a conditional bond. And so those people they weren't having to burden the system and be in there and be booked in and have all that. They were approved for a conditional bond before they had to go and be booked in, clothes changed, searched, and all those other kinds of things. So that's part of the reason the jail population dropped by about 1,000 people recently.
Thank you. Next question is going to be for Chief City, and just for those of you who do not think about these things, multiple cities, multiple police departments all feeding people to the county jail, but by far, because of the population, the city of Oklahoma City being the largest. So certainly what they do has a huge impact on the jail. So Chief City, the city began evaluation of the municipal system even before our task force began. So could you sort of walk us through some of what your goals were that caused you to do that, what they have been, and some of the changes y'all have made internally?
I'll interpret what he first said. We're the largest part of the problem. I got that. No, we are. We're the largest, obviously, we're the largest client to the county jail. Originally built as a city-county facility, so we don't have a jail any longer. So, what we really started doing even prior, and I'll have to throw Judge James. She's a municipal judge out there. If you don't know her, sit down and have a conversation with her. She'll tell you what she thinks. And she started this conversation. I remember having it with her 14 years ago in a lot of different areas. And to her credit, she was talking about having more indigency hearings and things like that for people that couldn't pay, to keep them from sitting in jail for days and months and sometimes close to years for not being able to pay, because it was a revolving door for them. So one of the things that we put in, or the courts put in, were they tripled their indigency hearings. So if a person can't pay, we don't just kick them out the door, issue a warrant because they don't pay or failure to pay, arrest them out on the street and put them back into jail. One of the first things we did is, in cooperation with the courts, is we put out a policy that we will not arrest somebody on a failure to pay warrant. So if they're a warrant for failure to pay, we don't arrest them any longer. Now at some point, they've still got to be held accountable to that. So we try to get them into the hearings and try to work out. Judge James will either totally dismiss it or try to work out some type of payment. And they've done that for years, but they haven't done it enough. They've just settled for issuing warrants and letting us pick them up and put them in jail and let them go and pick them up and put them in jail. And it's a revolving door, so you have an individual that's been in there a number of times. So To her credit, a lot of this was her idea, and actually we started doing that in the process when Vera came in and started looking at all the different reasons why we had people in jail, and that was one of them. We have always had cite and release. That means there's certain crimes that are really low-level crimes, maybe low-level theft or something to that effect, where we could just cite individuals and release them in the field. And so a lot of what we are doing, and we have been doing since the study and being part of this process, is to identify other charges that individuals really, they're not a threat. As long as they're not a threat, they have they're violent in some way, or they've committed an act of violence, then we could cite them and release them in the field without having to put them in jail, because there's just no reason to be there. Most of them will still show up for court. They still get notice they have to be in court, just like either you'll pay or you'll show up on a traffic ticket. They still come to court, most of them do. But we had gotten in this habit of, now you're going to jail, you didn't pay, or you didn't show up for court or something like that. So we're doing a lot more of that and trying to keep them and put them into jail in the first place. One of the things we are doing, those individuals that are going to jail on municipal charges, and this is just municipal charges only, because the state, it's a little bit different. It's a higher level charge usually, and we're going to discuss doing some more releases in the field and giving officers discretion of doing that on some minor offenses. But what we have done and what the courts have done is they get an automatic OR. So if you get put in jail, just hang on, don't pay, don't bond out. We're going to let you out in about 24 hours anyway. So that's, and because really a lot of people that are in there for that long, they can't afford to be there, and guess what? They'll show up for court anyway. And we found that to be the case. Most studies that you'll see across the country where they have put things in place like that don't show an elevation of crime. Now, that's one thing we want to look at. I mean, that's yet to be determined here as to, will crime go up if we're not actually putting people in jail or arresting people for low-level crimes? The old philosophy in law enforcement was a lot of those lower crimes, called the broken window effect. A lot of those lower-level crimes have a lot to do with people committing higher-level crimes in those areas. So, and we've really gotten away from that over the last several years, because it's just really not a fair way of policing the community. There's a lot of injustice, whether it's racial or so on, by doing things like that, because you're policing a certain area, and that certain area may be primarily Hispanic, primarily African American, and so it's really an unfair way of policing. And we want, our whole goal right now is to be more fair, not just in dealing with people and putting them in jail and letting them sit there, but how we police individuals and how fair we are in the first place, and how we treat people. And keeping people in jail the way we've been doing it has not been fair. It's really been unfair. Even the bond system needs to be looked at and revamped, because there's a lot of unfairness involved in that also.
Thanks, Bill. And White, we haven't forgotten about you. There's been talk about it already, but diversion programs that really focus on rehabilitation rather than incarceration can be a big part of reducing jail population. Would you share with us the kind of programs that we have now, and really what thoughts you have about new or expanded efforts?
I'm going to move just a little bit. I actually brought pictures, because how do you compete on being on a panel with a judge and a chief of police, right? We all want to be a chief of police.
And Roy Williams.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Roy is our moderator, so he automatically doesn't have to compete with us. But as our kids grow up thinking, oh, I'd love to be a police officer. Or I actually grew up thinking I might want to be a judge. So.
Not too late.
Very few kids grow up thinking, I want to be the commissioner of mental health and substance abuse for our state. Except for my son, who is 8, who tells people frequently, when I grow up, I'm going to move a desk into my mommy's office, and I'm going to run mental health with her, which is really cool. Now, the other thing he tells people frequently is he's also going to play in the NBA, so we'll see how all this works out. But in order to compete with some of these amazing people on the panel, one of the things I did is bring pictures. But before I start on a couple of slides, and I'm only going to show you 4, one of the things I want you to kind of think about, because we all come into this room with different levels of understanding of mental illness and addiction. It affects 1 out of every 4 of us in our state. So there's no doubt in my mind there are people in this room living their life in recovery. There's also no doubt in my mind that there's people in this room who have struggled or are struggling, and that every single one of us knows someone close to us who is in recovery or who's struggling. So what I want you to think about when we think about the fact that they're in the criminal justice system is we're going to talk about two other diseases for just a second. First, we're going to talk about asthma. If I started having an asthma attack right now, do you think many of you in this room, or Roy sitting closest to me, would look at me and say, just make yourself breathe normally? Right? No, we would never do that. Roy might say, somebody grab her inhaler, right? Let's get her the help she needs so she can breathe normally. Or if I struggled with diabetes, or one of us struggled with diabetes, and something was going wrong and your insulin was you needed insulin, would we look at you and say, just make your pancreas secrete insulin? Step up, make your pancreas secrete insulin. Don't you want it bad enough? No, right? We'd give people the medical help they need. Now, we'd probably say, might not have been a good idea for you to eat the sugar dessert, right? Okay, fair, because everybody has a responsibility in their disease. But we wouldn't look at someone and say, why don't you make your pancreas secrete insulin? But when someone struggles with mental illness or addiction, we look at them and say, why don't you just stop using? Right? And if you actually know the science about mental illness and addiction, or we look at someone with depression and say, why can't you just get out of bed today and go to work? Neither of those statements are, how can I get you the medical care you need so that you can get out of bed and go to work? How can I get you the medical care you need so you can stop using alcohol or methamphetamine or whatever the drug of choice might be for you? And that is the biggest difference, because what happens with mental illness and addiction, it's very similar to diabetes. Diabetes is where your pancreas isn't secreting chemicals correctly. Mental illness and addiction are exactly the same, it's just the chemicals are coming in your brain instead of your pancreas. The chemicals in your brain aren't working correctly. And so when I talk about the fact that 1 out of 3 people in Oklahoma can't get the help they need, I want you to think about what would it look like in Oklahoma if today we took away 2 out of every 3 people's insulin who had diabetes? What would our health status look like? Would people maybe start stealing to get their insulin? I mean, let's start thinking about what this looks like. And I think that really helps us start to think about, why would we ever think, as my panelists have said so eloquently, that putting people in jail or prison would make their brain secrete chemicals it wasn't already secreting, as opposed to getting the medical help. But the amazing thing about mental illness and addiction is that people can and do recover. I know many of you in this room are living a life in recovery, but it's pairing the treatment with the accountability. And I thought that was so important about what Chief Citty said, is accountability doesn't have to be behind bars. And in fact, we all ought to be smart enough at this point to know there's a better way. And so I'm going to show you what some of those better ways are right here in Oklahoma. So first is drug court. Oklahoma, one of the things we can be the most proud of is we are a national leader in amazing drug court programs across our state. We are a national leader. So here's what happens right now in Oklahoma. This is Oklahoma data. Currently, drug court costs about $5,000 a person per year. Prison costs $19,000 per year. Okay, so already off the bat, basic math, it's a huge cost savings. But that's not the reason we should look at drug courts. Why we should fund drug courts is because of what those outcomes are. So for individuals who are in the drug court program, there is a 95% drop in unemployment and 119% jump in monthly income. And what that means is people are now earning legal wages to take care of themselves and their families. One of the other things that happens that was pretty amazing to us, because it wasn't one of the reasons we started drug court. And I say we, let me explain. We fund it across the state, but the people who do these drug courts are on the ground. They're the judges, they're the district attorneys, they're the defense attorneys, they're the treatment providers, and they're the accountability officers. That's who's doing these programs, and most of all, the participants who are working their tails off to try to become sick people who get well. These are not bad people trying to become good people. These are not immoral people trying to become moral. These are people who have a disease that are trying to get the health care they need to become well, so they can fully engage in life just like those of the rest of us do when we're healthy too. And what we saw is a 116% increase in private health insurance for people who enter drug court. What does that mean? It means they're employed in jobs that actually provide them health care, which means I don't have to pay for their treatment anymore, and I can help someone else who doesn't have health care yet. It means the state's not paying for their treatment. It means they're employed and they have insurance. 81% of the participants who entered drug court that had children but they were no longer living with them or they were in foster care regained custody of their kids. Best way to break the cycle to make sure that their children aren't the most likely to end up going to prison as well is to have their parent, to see them break the cycle and now live a life where their mental illness is stable or they are in recovery and they're clean and sober and they're working and they're providing health insurance for their family. That's the best thing we can do to make sure that their child isn't the next one coming right behind them. But the most amazing thing about drug court here in Oklahoma, we've had over 10,000 graduates so far in drug court across the state, but we look at them 3 years out, because if you don't spend a lot of time in the criminal justice world with us, but we invite you to, 3 years is a magic number in the world of criminal justice. If you serve your full prison sentence and you are released, you are most likely to go back in within the first 36 months. If you don't go back into prison within the first 36 months, the chances of you ever going back drop significantly. So where someone is 3 years after their release from incarceration really is very telling. So we looked at the 8,545 graduates in Oklahoma who've graduated since 2001 and been out 3 years or longer. We've had over 10,000, but not all of them have been out longer. What we found is that for drug court graduates, less than 8%, 7.9 of them are reincarcerated 3 years later. But for people who serve their full prison sentence with the same crimes, who didn't have a chance, by the way, drug courts across our state are full every day, almost 24% of them have been reincarcerated 3 years later. Drug court is by far more effective at breaking the cycle. One of the other amazing things we do in terms of diversion programs here in Oklahoma is the offender screening. Actually looking at the person and doing a medical assessment and a criminal risk assessment to determine two things. Are they high or low risk for future criminal behavior? And do they have a high mental health and substance abuse need or a low mental health and substance abuse need? Because people who are high criminal risk and low mental health and substance abuse need are the people we probably need to talk about for prison and intensive supervision programs. They have high criminal thinking, and it's not because of mental illness or addiction. People who have low criminal risk and low mental health and substance abuse needs are people who made a poor decision and probably a one-time bad choice. Someone who doesn't struggle with addiction, who at the Christmas party had too much to drink and was pulled over on the way home. But it's not because of their addiction and not because of their criminal thinking. It really was a bad choice, and that will be enough that we don't need to spend any resources on them. But then we have people who are low criminal risk and high mental health and substance abuse need. And those are the folks we've got to get into treatment. Because if we put them in the criminal justice system and they're low criminal risk, it shows over and over what happens is that good criminals teach lower criminal risk folks how to be better criminals. That's why our system hasn't worked so far. And then we have folks who are high criminal risk and high criminal need. And if it's because of their health and substance abuse issue, they need treatment with intensive supervision and accountability, and that's exactly what drug court is designed for. It's high criminal risk, high mental health and substance abuse need. So what this offender screening showed us, and by the way, I only get one question. I specifically didn't ask for two, so I get to have a longer answer on my question, so don't worry, I'm not going to answer two. So specifically on offender screening, what this found, and this is Oklahoma County data. This is not statewide data. This is for the offender screening so far in Oklahoma County, and we're only resourced to screen about 20% of those who come into the criminal justice system in Oklahoma County. We're trying desperately to get to 100%. We only can screen 20%. About 30%, 27.9%, go to prison. And when we first saw this number, people were saying to me, I bet this is really upsetting to you, Commissioner White. I couldn't quite figure it out. And I said, why? And they said, because you would want everybody in treatment. I said, nope. What this tells me is it works. Because what the screening is doing is getting the right people in the criminal justice system, and we're diverting 72% of people into other options instead of heading to prison. So you can see some of the other options. Some are DA supervision, community sentencing. 23.5% are going into drug court and mental health court and veterans courts programs in Oklahoma County. 23% into DOC supervision, and 5% of the people had their case dismissed. Those low risk, low need folks. Some of the other amazing programs we have in Oklahoma County, I see North Care over there. North Care, one of our community mental health centers, operates the only day reporting program in the entire state of Oklahoma. Has a huge evidence base behind them, utilized in other states, and we've only been funded to provide one, and we do it here in Oklahoma City through North Care. Their day reporting program, which is a pretrial release program, it's people who are arrested, who a lot of times were sitting in jail until their trial date, which could be weeks and months, who are nonviolent offenders, who have mental illness as a serious mental health issue, and addiction issues as well. They go into day reporting, where they're ordered to show up at North Care every day and take their medication. They have to be looking for employment or employed, and they have to be working on their education. And why does that matter? Because now before they get to trial, the judge gets to see how they do in day reporting. Once we gave this person finally a chance at treatment, what happened? 97.8% of them are not rearrested. 98.5% had a decrease in jail days, which means we're not paying as taxpayers for them to be in jail, and 96% had a decrease in inpatient days. Why does inpatient days matter? The only way you end up in an inpatient psychiatric hospital in our state when your mental illness becomes so unstable that you have to be hospitalized, it means you weren't taking your medication most often. This means people are engaged and they're taking their medication. And my last slide. The thing that was the most amazing to me about our criminal justice task force is that when they were trying to figure out what to do about spending on jail and what to spend here and what to spend there, this task force said, and I only have one seat on it, nobody else on the commission is a mental health person but me. I'm way outnumbered. I'm way outnumbered with people whose jobs everybody else wants to have, because remember, nobody wants my job. They said, when we come up with a final plan, we'd like to invest $20 million in the brain health of Oklahoma. And that $20 million is projected to save $53 million a year in all the negative consequences that we're spending on the criminal justice system. We're going to do that by expanding programs that are currently working, like our drug courts and mental health courts that are full all the time here in our county, particularly our mental health court. District Attorney Prater continually asks me for slots for his mental health court all the time because he's doing amazing work. We have all kinds of programs that are full. Our Emerge program for women who need to be diverted from the criminal justice system, they need more funds. All of those amazing programs that are evidence-based that are working, we need more crisis beds. Our law enforcement frontline partners drive people all over the state trying to find an emergency mental health bed because the beds in Oklahoma County are full. They also happen to be full everywhere else in the state. And we've got to partner with housing and employment assistance. Because when we get people housing and a job and get them treated for brain health, they look like you, they look like me, they're our friends and our family who are doing well. It's only when we don't have those opportunities that people end up in the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Terri. We've got about time for one question. If anyone has a burning question, Avi?
Thank you all. What is the bigger problem, reform or funding for these services?
So my answer, and not everyone will agree with my answer is absolutely funding. Because right now what's happened, and our district attorneys have unanimously made the same call on this issue, as we are doing criminal justice reform, and we do need more of it, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We are not done. But as we're doing criminal justice reform, there aren't any services for anybody to go into. They're full. The waiting lists are long. The services are there, as you saw, but you don't have a shot at getting in. And so I truly believe that if we do not do funding near immediately, we're going to have a problem.
And he only said one question. He didn't say more than one answer. Part of you have to realize that there's a price to this. Okay, what you're talking on the front end, that $57 million savings up there, it doesn't come unless you put the dollars on the front end for treatment. That 57 doesn't happen unless you're putting in the treatment first. Eventually that 57, those savings are long-term. Those savings are a long-term, goal. So there has to be money up front for that treatment. Otherwise, all these reforms, they don't happen. If there's not upfront alternatives for this judge right here to put people that he trusts to put people into that treatment versus putting them behind bars, then he's not going to do it. And if he doesn't have enough of them, if he doesn't have the good programs. So that's got to be up front, and that costs. Funding, I think, I agree with Terri.
We're going to get you out of here on time. There's 16 other people on the council beside these three. They're just as passionate as these three, but let's thank these three for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So y'all can see how this impacts our quality of life here. So share what you've heard today with your family and friends. get the word out about what needs to be done here. We've also listed additional online resources in the program that you have that might be helpful to you. So, in conclusion...
If I could just say one thing.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I hear a lot of
Go ahead, you
people
can
very
do it.
interested in criminal justice reform. Let me see a show of hands of how many have been in a courtroom in the last 2 years. Okay? Fair amount of you folks, but again, our courts are open. If you want to see what's going on, if you want to see who's going to prison and why they're going to prison and who's not going to prison, please come by I'm on the second floor of the Oklahoma County Courthouse. The door's open all the time. I'm there almost every day. Maybe 3 days out of the year I'm not. But come in, see what's going on. I got a great staff. You can talk to them. You can find out why we're doing things, when we're doing things. And you'll see, and you'll be able to quickly determine who needs to go to prison and who doesn't. It's pretty obvious.
It's always better to visit Judge Henderson without the invitation of Chief Citty.
You can come ride with our cops and see them before they get to him.
Thank you all again.
All right, thank you.
Next month, we will be hosting another one of these, and it's about the visitor industry, which the hospitality industry is the fastest growth sector of our economy. Look forward to seeing you then.